Hey everybody, Professor Snart here. Okay, so we are really getting into sort of the heart of our English 1102 course. First of all, what you're probably noticing is just how quickly we move. Again, just a product of that 8-week format where we're taking what would otherwise be that whole full 16-week semester and basically cutting it the time in half. So we move like really quickly from one thing to another. So you really do have to sort of stay on top of things. So we want to check our due dates here. It's November 1st, Wednesday morning when I'm recording this. So we have just wrapped up both Halloween and the first due date for unit number 3, which I'll look at again in a second. There's a reply component for unit 3, so again you have a couple of extra days to do that. But especially given the nature of what unit 4 is, although this sort of goes generally, you really do want to be both kind of wrapping up, right, the reply component in a unit, but also moving forward. So I wouldn't necessarily wait until, right, this is done to look forward. And what I'm going to do here, and what I encourage you to do, is to always look a few units ahead, not doing the work necessarily, but just to see kind of how the various stages that we move through are interlinked with each other. So let's see. The fine print. So this is the stage 1. This is what we've just completed, at least as far as the main work. Again, this idea of looking for the fine print, quote unquote, that's all around us, whether it's in stores that we've visited, in user agreements for like apps or lines of credit people found. So that the material that I've looked at that people have posted have been really good. And exactly the kind of stuff that is like, you know, you get an assignment like this and it's like, oh, fine print, where am I going to find that? And then all of a sudden you start looking and it's like everywhere. One of the most interesting that I just looked at was, I want to say it was Melissa, maybe I'm getting that wrong, but somebody was in an Office Depot or Office Max type of store, and their print station had this notice about how the customer had to take liability for any damage that was done during the lamination of a document, or if you rendered the document like unofficial by laminating it or some crazy thing like that, which is like, first of all, I never knew, and second of all, as that student, I think it was Melissa, pointed out, it's like, well, it would be nice if the so-called professional print people knew like how much damage the lamination could do to a document, or what would be rendered like no longer a valid, I don't know, thing if you laminate your driver's license. I don't know. But anyway, the point being that all of a sudden the fine print is like everywhere around us, not just in kind of digital user agreements, but like all over the place. So some really, really interesting examples here. So for the stage 1 here, for unit number 3, we were really just discovering some fine print that we could work with. Again, not an entire contract that you'd want to have to deal with, but some piece of it that just seems a little weird, or you want clarification on, or you wonder, like, why do they need this language in there? Has something happened before? Did they get sued? Like, whatever. Okay, so this is just the beginning, obviously. So we reported out on what we found, and now we're going to have a student conference unit here, which is practically our midterm. Hard to believe, but that's kind of the way it works in our shortened course here. So there's a student sign up page, right? There's a bunch of conference days and times. You're just signing up for one. If it so happens that none of these times works for your schedule, just let me know and we can figure something else out. We can meet face-to-face in my office if you're on campus anyway. We can meet virtually. Again, a kind of like a video call. And so let me just see here. This is the point that I wanted to highlight. So the conference is worth 100 points, which is actually a lot in the context of our 1,000-point course. And the reason is not just that you kind of show up and have a conversation, right? But that you've actually done some thinking about the fine print that you discovered. And then our next step is to actually reach out to somebody via email. So it's really like a written assignment that we're working towards here. To get clarification. And again, we're not sending like an angry, ranty email. We're trying to develop the skill of like, how do you write a professional email that hopefully elicits a response from somebody in a position of authority or knowledge who could actually explain like why this fine print language is in place. And the purpose of our conversation here is that sometimes we have to maneuver a little bit to figure out like what would the best approach be, because it's not like a one-size-fits-all, because the kinds of language that people find for that fine print can be so diverse at this point. So I'm going to go back to our announcements page, and it just so happened I was making a very rare visit to the Outlet Mall in Aurora, and I happened upon their big code of conduct sign. It actually looks enormous, but only because of the way I took the picture. It's fairly small, and in fact I'm sure I would not have thought about it or looked at it if I wasn't sort of thinking about this fine print exercise, because it struck me as not exactly fine print, like it is kind of publicly visible here, but it's hardly, drawing attention to itself. Even the way it's colored is sort of mute, right? But like I posted in the assignment or in the announcement here, it's a really interesting piece of fine print. Again, like who decides what appropriate clothing is for a mall? What is loitering? If you're not like actively buying every single second of your visit to the mall. So, some make maybe more obvious sense, whether it's a smoking thing or just a safety issue with people riding bikes all over the place. But some of the other ones I think are a little more challenging. So I would identify this as fine print, or maybe just part of it, like again, the appropriate clothing, for example, or the loitering. Maybe I pick those too. So my point of contact would be fairly straightforward in this case. I'm sure there's some, individual, some customer service representative who represents the mall that I could email and maybe get some response about. I would ask like, who decides what's appropriate? Who decides what loitering is? What actions are actually taken? Have you had problems with this in the past? So those are the kinds of questions that I would build into an email. But if we go back to my other example, again, I think it was Melissa's, about this like warning about lamination in the print store. I could contact the print store and ask for clarification. That would be one thing to do, but I might also bundle that with a separate email. So my professional email project would actually involve a couple of emails, one to the print store, but also one to I don't know, the DMV or something. Like, is a laminated driver's license still a valid form of ID? Or think of some other document that you'd laminate and then harm the validity of, or like you would just have to dig a little bit further. So anyway, the point being, back to our Unit 4 here, is that because people's projects are beginning to diverge because the fine print is so different, we have this conference to again think about like what would the next step be moving towards, right? And this is why it's important to look a little bit ahead, to actually writing a professional email, or in some people's cases maybe two, maybe even three. And again, a professional email is by definition quite short. So this is one of our sort of core writing assignments here, but it's not, the whole point is not to produce this 10-page, kind of dusty, dry research paper. That doesn't serve a lot of real-world purpose necessarily. It's a school exercise, one that you're probably familiar with, at least in some form, but does it make your life better directly? I mean, maybe, sort of, kind of, but I think this sort of assignment has much more real-world application, right? Being aware of that fine print, and then developing the skills to figure out how it actually impacts you, or what it actually means. How much you owe in credit card fees or credit line fees, or why they can suddenly demand full payment. That is kind of valuable information to know. So one of the things that I want people to do is look forward to this unit so you understand kind of where we're going with this. And that will inform our conversation in Unit 4, where again, we don't just want to review the fine print that you found, although that's something that we'll definitely look at, but we'll actually think about where is your professional email going to go now? Who would it make sense to send it to? Again, it could be just one fairly obvious person, like in my mall example, but there might be cases where there's a couple of avenues that we could pursue to really unbundle the fine print that we've found. So clearly you want to get in here, sign up for a time that makes sense for you. Indicate whether it's face-to-face or virtual. You can find our virtual office link here in our course. Also good to give that a click through before you're trying to meet with me, so you're not spending too much time just getting the tech to work. Hopefully it's fairly straightforward, but again, good to give it a test run. And then, like I said, if there's a time or day that just nothing works for your schedule, let me know, and then we can figure it out from there. But it's really good at this point to have that longer view and sight of where this is all leading us, right? Finding the fine print, we're going to have that conversation about it, and where do we go next? Then we're going to actually go there, right? Produce that professional email or emails, depending on your situation, right? We have another feedback or peer, I don't want to call it a peer review exactly because it's not quite that, but getting some feedback on your email. We'll have groups set up. You'll have that opportunity to revise, of course, and then you're actually going to send it. This isn't just a school exercise. You're going to send it and hopefully get a response. We can't control that part of it, obviously, but if we're strategic about who we send it to, if we write an effective email with a clear action item for the person to respond to. Again, this is all stuff that we'll talk about as we get to it, but ideally we'll get a response and a timely enough one that we can report back to it before our class is done. And in the worst case scenario, you don't get a response, but that's sort of interesting too. Like if you've done your due diligence, identified an actual person or point of contact, not just some corporate entity that you try to get in touch with, and ask a reasonable question about language that's attached to the contracts or agreements that sort of govern how the corporation works or interacts with you, and you don't get a response at all, that's sort of telling, I guess I would say. But that's part of what we want to discover. And hopefully everyone does get a response that you can report back within the context of our course. Okay, so as always, if you have questions or concerns, you can be in touch with me. Keep real close track of these due dates. They come and go pretty quickly, again, because of our condensed schedule. And definitely get on top of arranging your student conference. It's really important to do because of the point value attached to it. But also, of course, it sets you up to be successful in the rest of our course devoted to developing and then finally ultimately sending those professional emails or just email. Okay, so I'll check in with everybody soon and hope you have a great rest of the week.